In North America, before there was Dragon Warrior, there was Phantasy Star. And before there was Final Fantasy, there was Phantasy Star 2. When people think RPGs, they rightly think of names like Square and Enix, but not many know or remember that Sega created some of the earliest and greatest console RPGs, and that they were one of the first to bring them to the US market. Phantasy Star 2 takes place in the Algos star system 1,000 years after Alice and her companions liberated it from the evil Lassic. Since then, the system has prospered under the care of a giant computer called Mother Brain. But something's gone wrong. Biomonsters are running amok on the planet Moda. You, as Rolf, are tasked with finding out why. Phantasy Star 2 stood out back in the day because of its sci-fi theme. Back then, most of the JRPGs we got were the swords and sorcery, save the princess style quests that just didn't happen in the Phantasy Star series. It was also one of the first RPGs released in North America that featured a multi-character party system. One where you could mix and match based on a handful of characters you meet throughout the game. In fact, that's one of the game's biggest challenges. Outside of Rolf and Nye, all of the other player characters can be swapped in and out of the party, but they excel at different things. Some use healing or attack techniques, others are better at fighting monsters, while some excel at fighting machines. The key to the game is figuring out who's good at what and building the most effective party for each new area. trailblazing and general greatness, Phantasy Star 2 still suffers from a lot of the same issues all RPGs dealt with back in the day. For one thing, English-speaking countries had to deal with a pretty awful localization job. Lots of misspelled names and generally bad grammar. One character in particular, Noah, is actually a character that was in the first Phantasy Star, which creates more of a link to the prequel considering that it takes place 1,000 years after the original game. But the two English translations of the game actually have this character named two different things. In one he's Lutz, in one he's Noah. So the name change pretty much destroys any link English players might have recognized between the two. Some other changes were made on purpose, though. For instance, there's an openly gay musician in the game who will charge less to teach music to the male characters than he will to the female characters because he thinks they're so cute. Obviously, the character was changed for the US version. In English, he exclaims how smart the male characters looked instead, and then charges them less. So rather than homosexuality, US audiences got misogyny. Awesome! One thing all audiences had to endure was the extreme difficulty curve. Phantasy Star 2 doesn't play nice. Players have to grind for what is a ridiculous amount of time by today's standards in order to strengthen their party for battles ahead. And since you can only save when you find a town, an untimely death can mean hours of lost progress. Sega did give US players a bit of a break though. Phantasy Star 2 came with a player's guide right in the package, which had maps of every dungeon and town in the game. It didn't help with any of the boss fights, but it did reduce the amount of wandering you had to do in each dungeon, so it really upped your chances of success. It was kind of a controversial thing back in the day, though. I remember reading a lot of magazines, especially Die Hard Game Fan, where people would constantly complain about how Sega ruined the game by releasing it with a hint book from day one. Oh, and one more thing that always kind of bothered me. Square gets a lot of credit for being bold enough to kill off one of its main characters in Final Fantasy VII, where Aerith meets an untimely demise and it's not possible to revive her. But anyone who played Phantasy Star 2 back in the day knows that Sega beat them to the punch by about 10 years. The female protagonist, Nai, meets her untimely and irreversible demise partway through the game. And considering she'd been presented as a sort of younger sister to the main character, Rolf, the whole thing actually had a bit of dramatic weight to it, especially if you were a kid playing in the 80s.
Secrets, if you really look at yourself, you would be speechless. What happened to being doctors and teachers? What happened to being your brother's keeper? Nowadays kids more worried